Welcome. I'm Joe Tucker, and I'm really pleased to be with you here today to talk about research grants and continue our research grant-o-thon. Today, we're delighted to have with us Dr. Wei-Ming Tang. He's an associate professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Tang is an epidemiologist and has written several NIH-funded grant applications. He is today going to be talking to us about significance and this key part of the grant application. So if you have any questions, just like as always, feel free to put questions into the Q&A box at the bottom. He will be finishing a little bit earlier, probably by 20 or so past, so that we have plenty of time for questions, and should be finished by about 1:30 UK time. So without further ado, over to you, Dr. Tang.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you everyone for joining today's section. In today's section, we will review what we should put into the significant part of the grant application. As you know, the significant part is one of the review criteria for an NIH grant. Regarding significance, we need to go back to definition. So what is a significance? The definition of significance is the quality of being important. From this definition, we should understand that, in this part, we need to write why this research is important. Why, the funders should support this study, let it funded. So the significance section is a critical component of an NIH grant proposal. It is used by the reviewers to evaluate the potential impact and the value of the proposed research. In here, you need to remember, we will give the impact and value of your study in this part. Previously, in NIH grants, they have the background section to give some background information, and they combine the background information part and the significant part. But 10 years ago, NIH removed the background part and only left the significant part. So that's why, in here, you need to include some background information as well as the impact and the value of your research. As part of the rigor of prior research, this section is supposed to address the strengths and the weakness of the prior research. In here, you need to put your study into the research literature, into the context, by reviewing lots of ongoing studies or phase studies, reviewing the study gaps, and how the proposed research will address the weakness or gap that identified. So that means in the significant part, you not only need to identify the gap, but you also need to propose how you will actually address the gap or address the weakness. But you do not need to write too many things in this section, because it's usually one to 1.5 pages. So usually we just need to propose the ideas we want to address the weakness or gaps in this proposed study. And later on in the approach section, you will have details things regarding how to carry out the study by addressing the gap. Also in this section, the discussions of the benefits and the impact of your work. This is actually one important real criteria for the NIH grant, the benefits and the impact of research. From here, you can see that we need to identify the problem, we need to propose the approaches for address the problem, and we need to discuss how actually our study will benefit the society, what's the impact of the research to the society, etc. So these are key things we need to remember when we need to write the significant part. So when we write a significant part, we need to few things to emphasize. We need to be careful for the logic. We need to be concise. Be careful for the heading. First, it should clearly explain why the proposed research is important and how it will advance scientific knowledge or improve human health. That's why your study need to be done and why they need funding, right? It should include a clear statement of the problems and its significance, a discussion of the current state of knowledge, a clear explanation of the potential impact of the proposed research, and a discussion of the innovative aspect of the proposed research. But we do not need to emphasize innovative part in here too much, because we have a like separate innovation section, which was introduced by Juliet last week. Also, it is important to use clear and concise languages throughout the significant part, and use heading and subheading to help reviewers navigate the section and make sure that the writing is well organized. So in here, you typically only have 1 page to 1.5 pages. You need to like use subheadings to like make the important things, more important. So like highlight the key things you want to highlight in this section. So by review some literature, I'll review some materials. I post 6 sections in here regarding the structure of how to write a significant part. This is not like a standard structure. This is just like suggested by some reviewers or suggested by writers. You can have a different way, but you need to include the most important part we have discussed before by including the important parts in your significant part. In here, firstly, you need to introduce the problem, beginning by introducing the problem that your proposed research aim to address. This is usually the first paragraph of the significant part. When it provides relevant background information to help reviewers understand the context of the problem and its importance. As I mentioned before, for NIH grants, they no longer have a background section, and in the first paragraph, the significant part, we usually need to introduce some background of the problem. This is basically like some background information regarding the problem you want to address. The second part you want to mention is actually the significance of the problem. Explain why the problem is significant and how it relates to human health for scientific knowledge, and provide evidence to support a claim about the significance of the problem. In here, you need to mention why your proposed research problem is important, how this will actually impact the human health, etc. And the third part, you need to mention the current stage of problem or current stage of knowledge. You need to describe the current state of knowledge in the field and how the proposed research will build upon this knowledge, highlights any gap knowledge or areas where previous research has been limited. Usually our research of building upon the previous knowledge is we are standing on the shoulder of the giants. So we are do additional things beyond the previous work. So that's why we need to keep remind that we need to put our research into the context, but not just like a list of the literature, but identify the problems or in the previous literature, what things need to be done to further improve health for human beings. For the fourth section, you need to mention the potential impact of your study, emphasize the potential impact of your proposed research on human health or scientific knowledge, explain how your research will advance the field and improve understanding of the problem. So as I mentioned before, in problems in the section in the part 3, you will identify the problem and identify the limit of previous knowledge. In here, you need to mention that how you actually address the previous problem and how you advance knowledge. So this is actually extending from the previous research. The first part is actually the feasibility. You will propose a way to solve the problems, but you need to clearly mention whether your solutions or your approach is feasible, is durable, whether, given the grant mechanism, like whether it is 500K or whatever, can support you to solve the problem in a limited area. Don't think things like too big you cannot address. Like in here, you need to address the problem why your approach is feasible for your study. And later on, you need to have a conclusion section. which is the impact section. It will summarize the significance of your proposed research and its potential impact, emphasize the importance of addressing the problem and how your research will contribute to this goal. Typically, in our grant submission, we have a section called impact, and this is actually summarized things a similar way. So we usually, for this part, we usually put into a different part of the grant. Sometimes we put it at the end of the grant proposal, but sometimes you can put at the end of the significance section to emphasize the significance of your proposed research and its potential benefits and impact. Okay, I summarized a few things to do when we write the significant section. We need to review a lot of literatures, especially the cutting edge literatures. Be sure that you include the most important situations. Some reviewers will say that, if you do not have put a certain reviewer, the literature into the section, the reviewers may argue that you did not actually capture most important things. You identify the problems maybe already solved, etc., or your literature is not updated, not the current stage of the problem, etc. So in here, when you put it into your literature, you need to be very careful. It needs to be most updated, have the most important findings from the previous literatures and cite the most important citations. So, and in this way, you can put your research into the context and demonstrate your contribution to the field. When you review the previous literature, you can actually review your own work by citing your previous work. And, sometimes we'll put some information in the previous knowledge part of the data already generated from our previous study. But in here, we also want to highlight your previous research and post our previous research into the context, into the whole literature to see we are actually start to pay attention to this field and have been done lots of work. And this project will extend our previous work. When we identify problems, we also want to know how to address the problems. And we need to highlight the most important evidence or symptoms in the previous literature. We usually have 5 to 8 separate paragraphs. Usually have no more than 1 page and up to 1 to 1.5 pages for this section. So in this section, you need to have a clear 5 to 8 separate paragraphs. And in each paragraph, we have mentioned different things. You can use the structure I mentioned before, or you can use your own structure. There are no standard. One thing we need to remember is that the significant part of your grant proposal is your opportunity to convince reviewers that your research is important and significant. And be sure to provide clear and compelling evidence to support your claims and make strong case for your research. And this I actually mentioned in the previous slides, but I want to emphasize it further. We need to clearly understand what we should put into the significant part. This is some quick introduction of the significant part, and I want to use one example to see actually how we address these problems, or how we mention these key things in our own grant proposal. I cited the one grant proposal from Joe Tucker. This was granted last year. It's promoting chlamydia and gonorrhea testing among gay men in China. You can see that there were 7 or 7 paragraphs in this section. The first paragraph, you can see that we are introducing the problem. In the first paragraph here, we mentioned that gonorrhea is one of the most common STI worldwide in China. And in China, so we emphasize that this is a significant problem. We will need to address this problem, and we want to mention the significance of the problem. How it actually impacts the world. gonorrhea antibiotics resistance is also becoming more common and rapidly increasing. We are worried about we have no antibiotics to use in the future because of the AMR issues, etc. Based on this knowledge, you will actually tell the reviewer that, okay, this is a very important problem. You need to pay attention to this problem. You need to support us to address this problem. And, you also need to review the current stage of the problem or knowledge. Tell the reviewer that, there are medicines already done. And, previous work have been focused on like how to address AMR or other issues. But there are certain still gaps in how to address this problem. Yes, the previous reviewers did like the previous researchers do lots of work, but there are still research gaps. In here, need to be careful that we are allowed like stand at the opposite side of the previous researchers, but instead we want to like step one forward to address additional problems. We are stand on the shoulder of the previous researchers. We are allowed to stand at the opposite side of the previous researchers. So in here, I need to mention that the problem is important. The previous research has spent much time on it, but the remaining problems and the current stage problems is still there. We want to have a new way, additional approach to address this problem. That's what we propose, like a forward strategy in this study. So actually in this part, you are introduced the approach regarding how you will actually address the problem. You want to use a new method to address the old problem. You want to use a new method to address the unsolved problem. And you want to emphasize that, your method is actually feasible by citing our previous work. In this section, typically we provide lots of like background information regarding our previous work on paid forward by telling the reviewers that actually, we have used this method before. It's quite success, we have a local support. This project is feasible. So you tell the reviewers that, we have the right approach to do it, and this approach is feasible. You need to support us, to solve the problems by using this new method. And I didn't put the impact section in here, as I mentioned before. We usually have a paragraph on impact or potential benefits of this project. You can either put into the significant section or at the end of the grant. I think that's it for the brief introduce of the significance part of the grant proposal writing. Yeah, I'm open to any questions or comments.
Thanks, Wei-Mei. And it looks like there are a few Q&A questions. Ijoma is asking about the difference between impact and value. Dr. Olatubi is interested in how is significance sort of stating the problem? Is that the focus of it? And then a question from Tatiana about methodology and how does this compare to like, how would significance map onto an academic research article?
Mm-hmm. Well, for the exact difference between impact and the value, I would like to say it's really hard to separate these two things. The impact is actually, tell you actually how your problem is important, and how your study will, will actually impact the health knowledge, or how will your study will address the problems. Actually, for the NIH grant, the impact is typically focusing on how your research will advance the knowledge, will help people to solve the problems. But also for the value, I think it's part of the impact, but I think the impact actually covers the values. It is because you have the values, that's why you have the impact. Joe, raise your hand. Yeah, Joe.
And just, I completely agree with you. The other thing, like in terms of value for money, an NIH grant actually doesn't have like a value for money. And it's not to say that they still consider the budget, like NIH grant reviewers certainly look at the budget, but it's not, it's more when a grant reviewer looks at an NIH budget, it's sort of like, is this the right ballpark? And if what you're proposing for a budget is like way too, too little
Very
or too,
realistic.
yeah, then sometimes it'll actually be funded, but then they'll say, oh, you should change this part of the budget specifically. And I agree with Wei Ming too about impact, that impact, at least in NIH grants, it's not, it's a little bit different from British and European grants, that they want to see the outcomes, or they want you to be explicit about what you're generating, but there's less of a sort of impact assessment compared to some other funders. Over.
Yeah. The second question is this section similar problem statement. Well, it's not just problem statement. Problem statement is actually one part of this section. Problem statement just means you need to identify the study problem or study question. But for the significant part, you not only need to identify the problem, but you also need to mention how you will address the problem and the potential impact of the problem. That is beyond the problem statement, okay? The third question is, the methodology used here seems similar to the one used in the introduction of an academic article. What are the main difference between the two? I would like to say it's kind of similar, but for our like general manuscript writing is we are using the way of like identify a single problem you want to address in an article. Typically the structure is like start from the introduction of the background and identify the problems, and then the aim of the study. But this is the structure of the introduction part of an article. But in here, you not only need to identify the problem, as I mentioned before, you may also want to see how you will actually address the problem, whether the way you want to address is feasible, and what's the impact of the potential of your research project. It's beyond the only introduced of the problem. So actually the introduction part of an article is typically similar to a problem statement or identify the problem. Yeah. The next question is, please, how this is significantly different from impact of research. From impact of research. The impact of research is one part of the significant. It's one important part, but this is, as I mentioned before, we need to mention three things. We need to identify the problem, propose an approach to address the problem, and the potential impact. This is just one actual part of the problem. How do I convince my funders that my study is worth their fund if I can't find any or enough literature to support my claim? This is a really, really interesting question. Joe, do you have any idea?
I agree, it's important. I mean, you want something that you want to propose an idea where there's some rationale for it to work, and the rationale could be RCTs or observational studies on some specific component of the intervention. There's a little bit of a tension here between, like, if it's something totally innovative and totally new, then just by virtue of it being so new, there won't be a lot of evidence to support it. But I think at the end of the day, in the significance section, you'll need to show how this is sort of complements and extends the literature. And I like how Wei Ming framed it as standing on the shoulders of giants instead of like toppling the giants. It's not David versus Goliath, because in many cases, you're really, your grant reviewers, they will be the Goliaths, right? Like they are the ones who like wrote the textbooks or the big articles. So
Yeah.
it's a fine line, I think, between standing on the shoulders of giants and proposing some new ideas to explore over.
Sure. The next question is how you differentiate between the significant section and the specific aim section, because the content appears similar. There are some things are similar. Actually, these two sections are quite different. The specific aims section is the most read section for your whole grant, and it seems like to be the most important part of your grant. In the specific aims section, you are not only need to identify the problem, like propose the approach you want to solve the problem, and you need to also like clearly shows the specific aims in your study section. For specific aims, you are more introducing like what you want to do in the study by emphasize the specific aims. Before the specific aims, there were usually like one or two paragraphs introducing the background. This part is kind of similar to the section of significance, but it is more concise in a more narrative way, like to tell the reviewers that actually there was a problem, and there's some ways to address the problem, and what you propose the way to address the problem. So typically, we want the main idea of the specific aims is to emphasize the key ways you want to address the problem. Usually we put 2 to 3 specific aims in this section, and we need to demonstrate what is our specific aims, how we'll actually what's the hypothesis, and how we'll address the problems in this part. It's very different actually. I would like to say some of the context in the intro part of the specific aim section is similar to significance, but in the significance part, you need to expand the literature. For the aims page, you only have one page to summarize so many problems, so many things. Like specific aims page is like a small proposal grant, but a significant part is an expanded section of one certain part of your grant. Okay, any additional questions?
This is fantastic. Thanks, Wei Ming. This is really helpful. We have next week, March 14th, I will be introducing the approach section, and then we're cutting the approach into 2. And so I would suggest for any of you guys who are writing grants at the same time to kind of at least sketch out your approach section. And then for any of you who are interested, the PowerPoint presentations as well as the video recordings are available on the website. And it's just if you go to seshglobal.org, it has its own header, and you can go into the Grant-o-thon website. And yeah, thanks again, Dr. Tong. It was really excellent. And see everyone again next week. Take care.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye.